The Vex Armada emerged from hyperspace like a mechanical storm, their dark ships blotting out the stars as they approached the Kethmori homeworld. Princess Zara stood on the bridge of the flagship Eternal Glory, watching the tactical display show impossible numbers. 300 Vex vessels faced a combined human Kethmori fleet of only 90 ships, and every military computer in the fleet calculated their chances of victory at less than 2%. Emperor Vekmal commanded the battle from his personal dreadnought, surrounded by admirals who still questioned the wisdom of adopting human tactics for such a crucial engagement. The traditional approach would be to form defensive lines and attempt to hold the enemy at maximum range, using superior Kethmori technology to inflict damage while minimizing losses. Every tactical manual in the Empire recommended this strategy. Colonel Rick Barnes stood beside Princess Zara, studying the enemy formation with the calm expression he always wore before impossible battles. Jake Miller was somewhere in the fleet's marine assault ships, preparing for boarding actions that most Kethmori officers considered suicidal. The human approach to this battle violated every principle of space warfare, but conventional tactics had failed against the Vex in every previous engagement. All ships, this is Emperor Vekmal, the communication system crackled. Today we fight for the survival of our civilization. The enemy believes they understand us, believes they can adapt to our methods as they have before. They are wrong. Today we fight like humans. The battle began exactly as predicted, with Vex adaptive systems quickly neutralizing the fleet's initial advantages. Energy weapons that worked perfectly in the first exchange became useless within minutes as enemy shields adjusted to counter them. Tactical formations that achieved early success were rapidly countered as the mechanical collective learned from each engagement. Princess Zara watched her people's traditional strengths become weaknesses against an enemy that treated warfare like a mathematical equation to be solved. Then Colonel Barnes gave the order that changed everything. Instead of retreating to regroup and develop new strategies, every ship in the fleet charged directly into the Vex formation. Admiral Voss screamed over the communication channel that this was madness, that they were abandoning all tactical advantage and flying directly into the enemy's strongest defenses. General Crix demanded that the Emperor countermand the human colonel's orders before the entire fleet was destroyed. But Princess Zara watched the tactical display and began to understand what the humans were planning. The Vex Collective's adaptive systems were designed to counter logical military tactics, but they could not process an enemy that abandoned logic entirely. When Jake Miller's marine assault ships launched toward the largest Vex dreadnoughts, the enemy defensive systems tried to calculate intercept courses based on standard boarding procedures. Instead, the human ships flew completely random patterns, some ships spinning wildly while others flew backwards, making themselves impossible to target accurately. Princess Zara led her own assault team toward a Vex command vessel, using everything Jake Miller had taught her about human combat methods. When her ship's weapons were disabled by adaptive countermeasures, she ordered her pilot to ram the enemy vessel's hangar bay. When standard boarding procedures were blocked by Vex defenses, she led her soldiers through the ship's waste disposal. Systems and maintenance shafts. The battle became chaos in its purest form. Human and human-trained Kethmori soldiers fought cybernetic beings in the corridors of mechanical ships, using broken pieces of machinery as weapons and turning the enemy's own technology against them. Jake Miller found himself fighting alongside Princess Zara in the core chamber of the Vex flagship, both of them covered in mechanical fluid and armed with improvised weapons that should not have been effective against advanced cybernetic enemies. "This is insane!" Princess Zara shouted over the sound of combat as she used a damaged plasma conduit to electrocute a Vex warrior twice her size. "None of this should be working." Jake Miller grinned as he fought 3 cybernetic beings simultaneously, using nothing but a broken chair leg and pure human stubbornness. That's exactly why it is working. The Vex can't adapt to tactics that don't make sense. The Vex Collective's greatest strength became its greatest weakness. Every time their adaptive systems tried to counter human methods, the humans changed. to completely different methods that had no logical connection to military doctrine. When projectile weapons became less effective, human soldiers began using maintenance tools. When maintenance tools were countered, they started throwing pieces of broken machinery. When that stopped working, they began fighting with their bare hands. Princess Zara watched Jake Miller take what should have been a fatal hit from a cybernetic warrior's energy weapon, only to continue fighting as if the wound was merely inconvenient. She had seen Kethmori's soldiers retreat from injuries half as severe, but Jake just wrapped the wound with torn fabric and kept attacking. When she asked him how he could ignore such damage, he looked at her with genuine confusion. "It's not fatal, so there's no reason to stop fighting," he said as if explaining something obvious to a child. "Besides, we're not finished here yet." The battle lasted 14 hours and ended with the Vex Collective in full retreat, their adaptive systems completely overloaded by enemies that refused to behave logically. 63 Vex ships were destroyed or disabled, while the combined fleet lost only 18 vessels. More importantly, the Mechanical Collective had encountered something they could not understand or counter, an enemy that became more dangerous as the situation became more hopeless. As the surviving Vex ships fled the system, Princess Zara stood in the ruins of the enemy flagship's command center, trying to process what she had just experienced. She had fought alongside beings who treated impossible odds as minor inconveniences, who continued fighting when any logical warrior would surrender, who somehow turned certain defeat into complete victory through sheer bloody-minded determination. "Sergeant Miller," she said quietly, "do all humans fight like this? Do your people really not understand the concept of hopeless situations?" Jake finished applying field dressings to his wounds and looked around the destroyed command center with satisfaction. "I guess we just don't see much point in giving up when there's still work to do. There's usually a way to win if you're willing to try hard enough, and don't worry too much about following the rules." Emperor Vic Maul's voice echoed through the communication system, announcing complete victory and the salvation of the Empire. Throughout the fleet, Kethmori soldiers who had learned to fight like humans celebrated alongside their human teachers, finally understanding what the old legends had tried to convey about Earth's warriors. Princess Zara began planning how to document these events for future generations. The galaxy needed to understand that somewhere among the stars lived a species that had never learned the meaning of impossible odds. She watched Jake Miller preparing for the next phase of operations, already planning how to pursue the retreating Vex fleet, and realized that for humans like him, saving the Kethmori Empire was just another day at work. The legends had been true all along, but they had understated the most important fact about human warriors. They genuinely did not realize they were legendary. Emperor Vic Maul stared at the collection of human military officers standing in his throne room, his golden scales reflecting the chamber's crystal lighting as he tried to hide his disappointment. These were the legendary warriors his daughter had risked everything to bring back to the Empire. They looked ordinary, almost primitive compared to the Kethmori officers who flanked him. Their uniforms were simple and functional, their weapons appeared crude, and their leader, Colonel Rick Barnes, carried himself with quiet confidence rather than the dramatic bearing expected of mythical heroes. "Princess Zara tells me your people have unique methods for fighting adaptive enemies," the Emperor said carefully. "Our situation has grown worse since she left. The Vex Collective has taken 4 more worlds and approaches our core systems. We have lost 2 more fleets attempting to slow their advance." Colonel Barnes studied the holographic battle reports floating above the throne room's central table. Jake Miller stood beside him, examining the tactical data with professional interest, while the Kethmori generals watched them with barely concealed skepticism. General Crix had already expressed his doubts about seeking help from what he called primitive backworld soldiers. "Your Majesty," Colonel Barnes said after reviewing the information, "your military appears to rely heavily on technological superiority and centralized command structures. The Vex Collective thrives against that kind of warfare because their adaptive systems can process and counter organized tactics very quickly. General Crick stepped forward with obvious irritation. Colonel, we have fought successful campaigns against dozens of species using proven military doctrine. These methods have served the Empire well for centuries. I'm sure they have, Barnes replied diplomatically. But you're fighting an enemy that learns faster than your doctrine can adapt. Every battle you fight teaches the Vex how to defeat you more efficiently in the next engagement. Admiral Voss gestured toward the humans' equipment with disdain. What could your primitive weapons possibly accomplish against Vex technology? They have energy shields that can deflect our most powerful plasma cannons. Jake Miller spoke up for the first time since entering the throne room. Energy shields work great against energy weapons. They're not as effective against a chunk of metal moving fast enough. The Kefmori officers exchanged glances of amusement. But Princess Zara remembered watching Jake fight Vex forces with improvised weapons and desperate tactics that somehow succeeded where conventional warfare failed. She had spent the journey back to the Empire trying to understand how human military thinking differed from everything she had been taught. Father, she said quietly, I have seen these humans fight the Vex and win. They use methods that seem impossible, but somehow work because the enemy cannot adapt to tactics that make no logical sense. Emperor Vekmal considered his options carefully. The traditional approach was failing, and each defeat made the Empire's situation more desperate. He could continue fighting the same way and watch his civilization slowly consumed by the mechanical collective, or he could trust his daughter's judgment about these strange alien warriors. Colonel Barnes, he said finally, what do you propose? Let us train a select group of your best soldiers in human combat methods, Barnes replied. Not just weapons and tactics, but a completely different approach to warfare. We need to teach them to think like humans in combat situations. The training began 3 days later in the Empire's primary military academy, where Princess Zara and 50 elite guards selected as the first students in what the regular Kefmori military privately called human foolishness lessons. Jake Miller found himself trying to explain concepts that seemed natural to him, but revolutionary to an alien species that had never questioned their military traditions. The most important thing to understand, Jake told the assembled Kefmori, soldiers, is that no plan survives contact with the enemy. When your original strategy fails, you don't retreat and develop a new strategy. You adapt immediately using whatever is available. Princess Zara raised her hand. But how can soldiers function effectively without proper command structure and predetermined tactics? Jake picked up a training rifle and removed several components, then reassembled them into a configuration that technically violated every maintenance protocol, but created a more effective close-quarters weapon. You learn to think for yourself instead of waiting for orders. Every soldier becomes their own tactical commander. The Kefmori students struggled with exercises that required individual initiative rather than coordinated group movements. Their military culture emphasized discipline and following orders, while human training focused on creative problem-solving and independent decision-making. When Jake demonstrated room-clearing techniques that involved improvising weapons from furniture and using environmental hazards as tactical advantages, several students questioned whether these methods violated the basic principles of civilized warfare. This is not honorable combat, one of the elite guards complained after Jake showed him how to use a broken chair leg as an effective weapon. Warriors should fight with proper equipment using established techniques. Jake looked at him with the patient expression he reserved for explaining obvious concepts. Honor doesn't matter much if you're dead. The Vex don't care about your fighting traditions. They just want to kill you efficiently. Meanwhile, Colonel Barnes worked with the Kefmori High Command to restructure their military doctrine from centralized control to distributed leadership. He introduced concepts that challenged every assumption about space warfare, suggesting that their fleets abandon formation flying in favor of independent ship actions, and that their ground forces operate in small units without constant communication with command centers. Your current system makes you predictable, Barnes explained to a room full of skeptical admirals and generals. The Vex can analyze your command structure and target your leadership nodes. When they eliminate your commanders, your entire military becomes paralyzed. General Crick stood up angrily. You are asking us to abandon 3,000 years of military tradition for the untested theories of a species that has never fought a major space war. We're asking you to try something different. Because what you're doing now isn't working, Barnes replied calmly. The definition of insanity is repeating the same actions while expecting different results. The first real test of human training methods came when a Vex scouting force attacked a supply depot in the outer system. Princess Zara led a mixed unit of human-trained Kethmori soldiers against the mechanical raiders, using tactics that horrified the regular military observers. Instead of maintaining defensive positions and waiting for reinforcements, she ordered her troops to assault the Vex positions directly. The battle lasted 6 hours and ended with complete victory for the defenders. But the methods used shocked every military professional who reviewed the combat footage. Princess Zara's soldiers had fought like humans, abandoning cover to attack superior enemies, improvising weapons when their standard equipment failed, and continuing to fight even when wounded. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to enjoy the combat rather than treating it as a grim necessity. This is not how civilized beings wage war, Admiral Voss declared after watching recordings of Kethmori soldiers laughing while they fought cybernetic enemies in brutal hand-to-hand combat. They are acting like barbarians. Jake Miller, who had participated in the battle as Princess Zara's advisor, cleaned his rifle while listening to the criticism with mild amusement. Maybe that's exactly what you need. The Vex understand civilized warfare too well. They can't adapt to barbarians because barbarians don't follow rules that can be analyzed and countered. Emperor Vekmal studied the battle reports with growing interest. For the first time in months, his forces had achieved complete victory against the Vex without losing a single soldier. The methods were disturbing and violated every principle of honorable combat, but they worked in ways that traditional tactics could not match. As news arrived that the main Vex fleet was approaching the Empire's capital system, Princess Zara realized that the coming battle would determine whether her people could learn to fight like humans quickly enough to save their civilization. Jake Miller studied the alien princess sitting across from him in the Guardian's mess hall, trying to understand why she kept staring at him like he was some kind of rare specimen. Captain Hayes had explained that Princess Zara needed a military escort back to her empire's territory, and Jake's unit had been assigned to accompany her diplomatic mission. It was supposed to be a simple protection detail, nothing more complicated than keeping her safe during the journey. The princess was different from the other aliens Jake had encountered during his service. Most species he had met were either trying to hire human mercenaries for dangerous jobs or attempting to avoid human space entirely. Princess Zara seemed genuinely interested in understanding how humans approached warfare, asking questions about tactics and training methods that seemed obvious to Jake, but apparently fascinated her. Sergeant Miller, she said during their third day of travel, Captain Hayes mentioned that you recently defended a mining station against pirates. Could you tell me about that engagement? Jake shrugged and continued eating his meal. Nothing special about it. Pirates attacked the station. We defended it. Pretty standard stuff. But the reports say you were outnumbered 5-1 and still achieved complete victory with minimal casualties. We had good defensive positions, and the pirates weren't expecting real resistance, Jake replied. Most of these raider groups are used to hitting soft targets that surrender quickly. When they run into people willing to fight back, they usually don't know how to handle it. Princess Zara leaned forward in her seat. The station manager described your tactics as impossible. He said you boarded enemy ships while under heavy fire and fought the pirates in hand-to-hand combat. Jake nodded. Sometimes you have to take the fight to the enemy instead of waiting for them to come to you. Pirates expect their victims to stay defensive. When you go on the attack, it confuses them and gives you the initiative. The conversation was interrupted by an emergency alert from the bridge. Captain Hayes' voice echoed through the ship's communication system. All hands to battle stations. We're receiving a distress call from a Kefmori supply convoy under attack by Vex forces. Jake felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with combat alerts. He stood up and headed toward his equipment locker, already running through weapon checks and tactical considerations in his mind. Princess Zara followed him, her expression shifting from curiosity to genuine fear. "The Vex," she whispered. "They adapt so quickly to our weapons and tactics. Every battle we fight against them becomes harder than the last." Jake finished strapping on his armor and checked his rifle's ammunition count. "Then we'll have to make sure this battle ends before they can adapt." The tactical situation was worse than Jake expected. The Kefmori convoy consisted of 6 transport ships and 4 escort vessels, all under attack by 3 Vex cruisers that had already disabled 2 of the escorts. The alien ships were strange-looking things, all angles and mechanical precision, with weapon systems that seemed to shift and reconfigure between attacks. Captain Hayes addressed Jake's unit over the communication system. "Marines, we're going to attempt a boarding action on the lead Vex vessel. Intelligence suggests their adaptive systems work slower in close-quarters combat situations." Jake studied the tactical display and felt a familiar combination of excitement and professional focus. Boarding actions were always dangerous, especially against an unknown enemy, but they played to human strengths in ways that long-range space combat did not. "Roger that, Captain. My team is ready." Princess Zara grabbed Jake's arm as he prepared to move toward the boarding pod. "Sergeant, you cannot be serious about attacking those ships directly. The Vex Collective learns from every engagement. They will adapt their defenses faster than you can overcome them." Jake looked at her with the calm expression he always wore before dangerous missions. "Princess, sometimes the best way to deal with an enemy that thinks too much is to not give them time to think." The boarding pod launched from the Guardian and streaked toward the nearest Vex cruiser, its armored hull absorbing hits from defensive turrets that tracked its approach with mechanical precision. Jake felt the familiar stomach-dropping sensation of combat insertion as the pod's cutting charges breached the enemy ship's hull, and his unit poured through the opening into alien corridors that hummed with electronic activity. The Vex defenders were unlike anything Jake had encountered before. They moved with perfect coordination, their mechanical bodies adapting to human tactics within minutes of first contact. When Jake's unit used standard rune-clearing procedures, the Vex adjusted their positions to counter those exact methods. When the Marines switched to suppression fire and movement, the enemy immediately developed countermeasures for those tactics as well. Princess Zara monitored the boarding action from the Guardian's bridge, watching her worst fears come true as the Vex Collective began neutralizing human advantages with terrifying efficiency. She had seen this pattern in every battle her people fought against a mechanical enemy. Initial success followed by gradual adaptation followed by inevitable defeat. But something different happened. Instead of following predictable tactical doctrine, Jake Miller did something that made no sense from a military perspective. When his carefully planned assault routes were blocked by adapted Vex defenses, he ordered his Marines to attack through the ship's waste disposal system. When their weapons became less effective against modified Vex armor, they began using maintenance tools and pieces of broken machinery as improvised weapons. Princess Zara watched in amazement as Jake Miller fought a cybernetic warrior twice his size using nothing but a damaged plasma cutter and what appeared to be pure stubborn determination. The Vex Collective's adaptive systems could not process an enemy that abandoned logical tactics in favor of creative desperation. Every time the mechanical defenders adjusted to counter human methods, the humans changed to completely different methods that made no tactical sense but somehow worked. The boarding action lasted 47 minutes. When it ended, Jake's unit had disabled the Vex cruiser's main systems and captured valuable intelligence about the Collective's command structure. 3 Marines were wounded, 1 seriously, but they had achieved something the Kefmori military considered impossible. They had defeated Vex forces in direct combat without losing a single soldier. Jake emerged from the boarding pod, covered in mechanical fluid and carrying a wounded Marine, his expression showing nothing more than professional satisfaction at a job completed. Princess Zara stared at him as medical personnel took charge of the injured soldier, trying to understand how someone could treat a miraculous victory as routine work. "Sergeant Miller," she said quietly, "do you realize what you just accomplished? You defeated Vex forces using tactics that should not have worked. You fought cybernetic beings in hand-to-hand combat and won." Jake finished his post-mission weapon cleaning and looked at her with mild confusion. "We did our job, Princess. The convoy is safe, and we gathered intelligence about enemy capabilities. Pretty standard boarding action, all things considered." Princess Zara realized that Jake Miller had no idea he had just performed what every military expert in her empire considered impossible. He genuinely believed that fighting overwhelming odds with improvised weapons was normal procedure for human soldiers. The legends her grandmother had told her were not exaggerations or myths. They were understated descriptions of what humans considered ordinary military service. "Your people," she said slowly, "do you all fight like this? Do all human warriors refuse to acknowledge when situations are hopeless?" Jake thought about the question for several moments before answering. "I guess we just don't see much point in giving up. There's usually something you can do if you're willing to try hard enough." As the Guardian resumed course toward Kethmori space, Princess Zara began planning how to convince her father that humanity's approach to warfare might be exactly what the Empire needed. She had found her legendary warriors, and they had no idea they were legends. Princess Zara gripped the controls of her small diplomatic ship as it dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of human territory. She had defied her father's direct orders to stay within the Empire's borders, taking only a minimal crew and avoiding the main Kethmori fleet patrols. The star charts she followed were old and unreliable, gathered from traders and smugglers who claimed to have visited human space. Her ship's sensors immediately detected 3 vessels moving to intercept her position. They were smaller than she expected, with angular designs that looked more functional than elegant. The lead ship transmitted a communication request in clear galactic standard, which surprised her since the report suggested humans barely understood basic space protocols. "Unknown vessel. This is Captain Lisa Hayes of the Earth Defense Ship Guardian. You have entered restricted space without authorization. State your identity and purpose immediately." Princess Zara activated her communication system, hoping her diplomatic credentials would prevent any misunderstandings. "This is Princess Zara of the Kethmori Empire. I request permission to speak with your military commanders about a matter of urgent importance to both our species." There was a long pause before Captain Hayes responded. "Princess, you're a long way from Kethmori space. We'll need to verify your identity and scan your vessel before we can discuss anything further. Please prepare to be boarded for security inspection." The boarding process was unlike anything Princess Zara had experienced in diplomatic encounters with other species. The human soldiers who came aboard were polite but thorough, checking every compartment and scanning all equipment with devices. That seemed primitive yet effective. They treated her with respect but showed no particular awe at her royal status. Captain Hayes herself was a surprise. Princess Zara had expected human warriors to be massive, intimidating figures covered in battle scars. Instead, she found herself facing a woman of average height with brown hair pulled back in a simple style, wearing a uniform that was clean but clearly designed for function rather than ceremony. There was something in her eyes that suggested combat experience, but she carried herself with the calm confidence of someone who did not need to prove her abilities to anyone. "Your credentials check out, Princess," Captain Hayes said as they sat in the Guardian's small conference room. "Though I have to admit, we weren't expecting a visit from Kethmori royalty. What brings you all the way out here?" Princess Zara chose her words carefully. "My empire faces a terrible enemy called the Vex Collective. They have technology that adapts to our weapons and tactics, making conventional warfare impossible. I have heard stories about human warriors, legends that suggest your people have unique approaches to combat. I need to know if these stories are true. Captain Hayes looked genuinely puzzled. What kind of stories are you talking about? Tales of humans who never surrender, who fight with primitive weapons against advanced enemies and somehow win. Stories about warriors who refuse to die, even when logic says they should. My people call them legends, but I hoped they might be real. The captain was quiet for several moments, clearly trying to understand what the princess was asking. Princess, I'm not sure what you heard, but we're just regular military personnel doing our jobs. We use standard tactics and equipment like any other space force. I don't know about any legends. Princess Zara felt disappointment wash over her. Captain Hayes seemed competent but ordinary, nothing like the mythical figures from the old stories. Perhaps I could observe your training exercises or speak with your most experienced warriors. I need to understand how humans approach warfare. I suppose that could be arranged, Captain Hayes replied. We have a Marine unit conducting training exercises on the Guardian right now. Sergeant Tony Rodriguez runs a good program. You're welcome to watch if you think it would help. The training area was a converted cargo bay filled with obstacles and targets. Princess Zara watched as a dozen human soldiers practiced combat scenarios under the supervision of Sergeant Rodriguez, a stocky man with graying hair and numerous small scars on his hands and arms. The exercises looked professional, but unremarkable, similar to training she had observed in her own empire's military academies. The key is adaptability, Sergeant Rodriguez explained as his soldiers moved through a simulated building clearing exercise. When your primary plan fails, you switch to Plan B. When Plan B fails, you make up Plan C on the spot. The enemy can't predict what you're going to do if you don't know yourself until you do it. Princess Zara nodded politely, but privately wondered if she had made a terrible mistake coming here. These humans seemed competent but hardly legendary. Their weapons were indeed projectile-based, their tactics appeared standard, and their soldiers looked like ordinary beings rather than the mythical warriors from the stories. The training session was interrupted by an emergency alert. Captain Hayes' voice echoed through the ship's communication system. All hands to battle stations. We have a distress call from civilian transport Azure Dawn. Pirates are attacking a convoy in Sector 7. Princess Zara watched the transformation that came over the human soldiers. The calm, professional demeanor remained, but something else appeared in their eyes, something she recognized from her own warriors, but somehow more intense. Sergeant Rodriguez began issuing orders with quick efficiency, while his Marines checked their equipment one final time. Princess, I'm going to ask you to remain on the Guardian while we handle this situation, Captain Hayes said as she prepared to leave the bridge. It should be a routine operation. The battle began as Princess Zara expected, with the Guardian and its escort ships moving to engage the pirate vessels threatening the civilian convoy. She watched the tactical display as the human ships moved into attack formations that seemed conventional enough. The pirates had superior numbers, but their ships appeared older and less well-maintained than the human vessels. Then something went wrong. The pirate fleet was larger than the initial scans had indicated, with several heavy cruisers hidden behind the smaller raiding ships. The human escort vessels took heavy damage in the first exchange, and Princess Zara could see on the tactical display that they were badly outnumbered. Any sensible military force would call for reinforcements and withdraw to a safer distance. Instead, she watched in amazement as the human ships pressed their attack. When the Guardian's main weapons were damaged, Captain Hayes ordered a direct assault on the pirate flagship. When one of the escort vessels lost power, its crew rigged the ship's reactor to overload and rammed it into an enemy cruiser. When conventional tactics failed, the humans did something that defied every principle of space warfare Princess Zara had ever studied. They got angry. She monitored the communication channels and heard human voices growing more determined as their Situation became more desperate. Instead of requesting permission to withdraw, they were asking for permission to board the enemy ships. Instead of calculating odds of survival, they were planning ways to take more pirates with them if they died. Battle lasted 2 hours. When it ended, 3 pirate ships were destroyed, 2 more were disabled and drifting, and the remainder had fled the system. The civilian convoy was safe, though several of the escort vessels would need major repairs. Princess Zara stared at the tactical display, trying to understand what she had just witnessed. "That was closer than I like," Captain Hayes said as she returned to the bridge. "But we got the job done. The convoy is safe, and the pirates learned that this sector is under our protection." Princess Zara looked at the captain with new eyes. "You were outnumbered 3-1. Logic dictated that you should have retreated and called for reinforcements." Captain Hayes shrugged. "Those were civilians under attack. We don't abandon people who need help, regardless of the odds." For the first time since arriving in human space, Princess Zara began to believe that the legends might be true after all. Princess Zara sat in the Grand Council chamber of the Kefmori Palace, her blue-scaled fingers drumming against the polished stone table as she listened to another failed battle report. The Vex Collective had taken 3 more worlds in the Outer Rim, their mechanical ships cutting through the Empire's defense fleets like heated blades through ice. Her father, Emperor Vekmal, stood at the head of the massive table, his golden scales dulled with worry as he studied the holographic star map floating before them. "The Vex adapt faster than we can counter their tactics," General Crix reported, his voice heavy with defeat. "Every weapon we use against them becomes useless within hours. Their ships learn our attack patterns and adjust accordingly. We lost the 7th Fleet at Morium Prime because they turned our own plasma cannons against us." Princess Zara watched the faces around the table grow more desperate with each passing moment. These were the greatest military minds in the Empire, veterans of a dozen successful campaigns against various alien species. Yet they sat here like younglings who had lost their first sparring match. The Vex Collective was unlike any enemy they had faced before, a hive mind of cybernetic beings that treated warfare like a mathematical equation to be solved. "Perhaps we should consider evacuation protocols for the core worlds," Admiral Voss suggested quietly, and several heads nodded in agreement. The princess felt a surge of anger at their quick surrender. Her people had ruled this sector of space for 3,000 years, and now they were ready to abandon their homeworlds after a few defeats. Emperor Vekmal studied the map for long moments before speaking. "There must be something we have not considered. Some ally we have not contacted. Some weapon we have not tried." His voice carried the weight of a ruler watching his empire crumble. Princess Zara remembered the old stories her grandmother used to tell her, tales from the outer reaches of known space about a species called humans. She had always assumed they were just entertaining myths, stories created to inspire children with tales of impossible bravery. The humans in those stories never surrendered, never retreated, and somehow always found ways to defeat enemies who should have crushed them easily. "Father," she said, standing up from her seat, "what about the human warriors?" The council chamber fell silent. General Crix was the first to laugh, a harsh sound that echoed off the crystal walls. "Princess, surely you do not believe those old tavern stories. Humans are barely capable of space travel. They have no significant military presence in any of the known sectors." Admiral Voss shook his head with amusement. "Those tales are nothing more than propaganda created by smugglers and pirates to make themselves seem more dangerous. I have seen the human ships, small primitive vessels that barely qualify as military craft." Princess Zara felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she pressed forward. "The stories say they fought the Zarian Empire to a standstill using nothing but projectile weapons and stubbornness. The Zarians had energy shields and plasma artillery, yet somehow these humans held them off for years." "Impossible," General Crix declared. "No species fights with primitive weapons against advanced technology and survives." The Xerians probably made up those stories to hide their own military failures. Emperor Thekmal raised a hand for silence. Tell me these stories, daughter. Perhaps there is wisdom in old tales that we have overlooked. Princess Zara took a deep breath and began recounting the legends she remembered from her childhood. She spoke of human warriors who refused to die even when mortally wounded, who fought with broken weapons jury-rigged into new forms, who somehow turned desperate situations into victories through sheer determination. She told them about the Battle of Kepler Station, where 50 human soldiers supposedly held off 3,000 Xerian troops for 6 days until reinforcements arrived. They say humans have something called stubbornness, she explained. It makes them continue fighting when any logical being would surrender. They do not understand the concept of hopeless odds. The council members exchanged glances, some still smiling at what they considered childish fantasy. General Crix leaned forward in his chair. Princes, even if these stories contained a grain of truth, what could a handful of primitive warriors do against the Vex Collective? We have lost entire fleets to their adaptive technology. Maybe that is exactly why we need them, Princess Zara replied. Every strategy we use is logical, predictable. The Vex learn from our tactics because our tactics make sense. Perhaps we need warriors who do not make sense. Admiral Voss consulted his data pad. According to our intelligence networks, humans control perhaps a dozen star systems on the galactic rim. Their largest military vessel is smaller than our escort frigates. They use projectile weapons, chemical explosives, and other antiquated technology. Even if we could convince them to help us, what could they possibly contribute? Emperor Thekmal studied his daughter's face for several moments. He had always valued her intelligence and intuition, even when her ideas seemed unconventional. What exactly are you proposing, Zara? Send me to human space, she said. Let me find these warriors and see if the legends contain any truth. If they are just stories, we have lost nothing but time. If there is even a small chance they can help us understand how to fight an enemy that adapts to everything we do, then we must try. The council erupted in protest. General Crix stood up. So quickly, his chair scraped against the floor. This is madness. We cannot send the Imperial Air on a mission to chase fairy tales while the Vex fleet advances toward our core worlds. The princes would be traveling into completely uncharted political territory, Admiral Voss added. We have no diplomatic relations with the human governments. She could be captured, held hostage, or worse. Princess Zara looked directly at her father. The alternative is watching our empire fall to an enemy we cannot defeat with conventional methods. Every day we delay, more worlds are consumed by the collective. If there is even the smallest possibility that these human warriors are real, we have to investigate. Meanwhile, in a completely different part of the galaxy, Staff Sergeant Jake Miller finished securing the perimeter around Mining Station Omega-7. His unit of 12 Marines have been stationed here for 3 weeks, providing security against the pirate raids that plagued this sector. It was supposed to be a simple assignment, a break from the more dangerous operations they usually handled. Jake checked his rifle and looked out at the asteroid field surrounding the station. 3 days ago, a pirate fleet had tried to take the mining operation, expecting to find the usual minimal security force. Instead, they had encountered Jake's Marines, who treated the attack like a training exercise. The pirates had superior numbers and better ships, but they made the mistake of thinking they could intimidate human soldiers into surrendering. The battle lasted 4 hours. When it ended, 2 pirate vessels were drifting hulks, 3 more had fled the system, and Jake's unit had suffered only minor injuries. The station manager kept thanking them as if they had performed some kind of miracle, but to Jake and his Marines, it was just another day. At work, Lieutenant Amy Foster approached him, her helmet tucked under her arm. Station security wants to throw us another celebration dinner. Apparently, word about the pirate raid has spread to other mining operations in the sector. Jake shrugged. We did our job. Nothing special about that. Amy smiled. Tell that to the alien workers. I heard some of them calling us the demons who do not retreat. Seems like our reputation is growing. Jake had no idea that his unit's actions were already becoming the subject of stories told in cantinas and trading posts across this sector of space. He could not know that somewhere far away, an alien princess was preparing to risk everything to find warriors exactly like him. The legends were about to become reality,